It's Sunday, May 26, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is the co-founder and CEO of the American Sunlight Project. She's an internationally recognized expert on disinformation and democratization, one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in AI, and the author of 2 books, How to Lose the Information War, which the New Yorker called a persuasive new book on disinformation as a geopolitical strategy. Nina Jankowicz, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thanks so much for having me, Anthony.
So 3 words we'll start off with: Russia, Russia, Russia. Maybe I should do it like this. And the reason I start like that is because the rhetoric of the disgraced former president is to deny any relationship with Russia, any influence from Russia. And yet he stood on stage in Helsinki next to Vladimir Putin and was asked by a member of the press, did Putin interfere with the 2016 election? Have you asked him? And he said, yes, I've asked him. And he said, no. And who am I supposed to believe? The US security services or the guy standing next to me?
Yeah,
so
former KGB agent.
Former KGB agent, right. So if that's not proof that Donald Trump is a Russian operative, I don't know what more people want. But parking that just for a second, Russian disinformation and also influence has not stopped. 2016 for sure, 2020 undoubtedly. Here we are 4 years later with an election looming, and it seems that, you know, there's kind of no slowdown in that type of stuff. We're going to come on to the election, but first let's just talk about the fact that you kind of ran this now defunct panel within the Department of Homeland Security, which was going to focus on the spread of harmful disinformation and devise ways to counter it. But you yourself were the victim of disinformation pretty much from the MAGA Republicans, and that's why it kind of shut down. Could you just give us a little bit of history on that before we get into 2024?
Absolutely. So I was in 2022 nominated to lead the Disinformation Governance Board, which was meant to be an inter-DHS, Department of Homeland Security, coordinating body to set out best practices and policy guidance for the department as it dealt with disinformation. I think we can all agree that that's a good thing. Frankly, you know, that we would want our government to work more smoothly, that we would want there to be guardrails, protections for civil rights, civil liberties, privacy. That was my job. But unfortunately, the folks on the very far left, and some, I have to say, on the far right, or sorry, other way around, folks on the very far right and some on the very far left as well, categorized this group as a ministry of truth. And it was nothing to do with censorship. It was nothing to do with deciding what was true or false online, but it became very profitable for them to say that it was, and very profitable for them to attack me personally. And unfortunately, the administration decided kind of to roll over to these attacks rather than staunchly defend what was going to be an organization defending democracy, defending, the right to free speech. And as a result, I decided to resign because I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I was also pregnant at the time all of this was going on. I was a couple weeks away from having my first child. And I thought, perhaps naively, that if I resigned, the attacks and the threats and violent threats against me and my family would stop. That wasn't the case. Fox News continued to defame and lie about me hundreds of times over the next several months, which led me to launch a lawsuit against them. I'm actually suing them for defamation right now. And frankly, the attacks against me and my family continue today. Even though Fox News for a time has put the brakes on, others continue to defame me. And there has been a wide array of attacks against disinformation researchers around the United States for the work that they're doing, trying to defend the truth and defend our discourse ahead of a huge election, as you say. The thing that makes me most upset about what happened is that the Republicans have put this effort on the altar, right, sacrificed it to make a political point when what they're actually doing is getting in the way of our national security. We are going to be dealing with important issues like interference in elections. Part of what DHS does is make sure our election infrastructure is secure. Things like disaster response, where there's a lot of disinformation. Things about security at the border, which ostensibly they care about, right? There's a lot of disinformation sending people who may not have a chance at getting asylum or making a life in the United States up to the border and ruining lives in the process. That's what we were going to be working on. And unfortunately, because they wanted to make this political point and be the heroes of free speech, they not only overturned my life, but they really undermined our national security in the process.
I get the feeling that expertise is not something that Republicans really care for. And it's something that has lost a lot of value in this country at a senior level. The idea that you are brought in because you are an expert. And then people who are not experts will then libel you or criticize you or whatever to try and make a political point. And that's the tragedy of all of these departments that have suffered, and Alejandro Mayorkas has been one of them as well. They're trying to impeach him heading up immigration, and the guy is an expert, right? And it's like people who know nothing are criticizing him. How do you feel as someone who is overly qualified for that role, who was on the receiving end of this bile from people who barely got out of college?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was frustrating to me is that my views were so wholly misrepresented. Actually in my work, I am vehemently against censorship. I am the granddaughter of someone who was in a gulag, right? Like you can't find somebody who's more against censorship than me. And across all my work, my testimonies to Congress, I always repeated playing whack-a-troll and removing content from the internet actually doesn't do us any good here. Like we need to educate the populace. We need to have transparency and oversight over social media platforms. That's what we really need. But all those views were reduced down to a couple of tweets, including one. It's really funny that you started the program with Russia, Russia, Russia. I was live tweeting the presidential debate, that really terrible one that everyone needed to drink afterward between Trump and Biden, where, they were just slinging insults at one another, two old men yelling at one another. And I had live tweeted that line where Trump said Russia, Russia, Russia after Biden was talking about the letter from the 50 former intelligence officials who were warning us that the Biden laptop might be a Russian disinformation operation. People looked at that tweet, which again was a live tweet of the debate, and said that I was endorsing the theory that the Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. I actually was much more nuanced in my analysis of it. I said, we don't know where this came from until it's confirmed. Like, let's just slow our roll a little bit. But that tweet went absolutely viral, and people didn't look at the rest of my body of work, right? Because people don't read anymore. people don't want to engage with nuance. Everything that we see online is totally context collapsed. And that's what was really frustrating.
Let's talk about that letter. This is 2020. More than 50 former intelligence officials signed this letter casting doubt on the disclosure of emails allegedly belonging to Hunter Biden. The kind of top line was it had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. And this was around a batch of documents released by the New York Post, right, that purported to tie Biden's son's business dealings with Joe Biden himself under the banner of a headline, Biden's secret emails. And it was all, from the laptop that was Rudy Giuliani had and said he got it from the Mac shop owner in Delaware who also alerted the FBI. We've come to discover, if we fast forward a little bit, after this kind of recent when they were trying to impeach Joe Biden and looking for evidence and trying to get Hunter Biden to, I don't know, they wanted him to confess or something. Confess what? I don't know. But they actually were bringing in, I'm talking about the MAGA Republicans in Congress here, James Comey, for example, were bringing in witnesses that they themselves were Russian operatives.
Yeah.
And where it turned out that, this whole laptop phenomenon, even going back to Pizzagate and everything else, can really be traced back to the Kremlin and to Russian disinformation. This is how they do it. They don't come out and go, "Hi, we're the Russians, and this is what we're up to." They're far smarter than that. So just to explain to people who don't really understand how Russia does this, who are these people, and how do they go about kind of infiltrating American culture?
Yeah, so this is a technique called information laundering, right? And so for the first part of this, I want to say it seems now that parts of the laptop probably were real. They've been able to corroborate that they were either stolen or that perhaps this story about the laptop repair shop may have happened. We still don't know 100% for sure, but they've corroborated that these emails at some point did go, most of them at least, to or through Hunter Biden's account, right? Okay, so let's talk about that. We all know what a hack and leak operation is. We remember that from 2016. A bad actor, whether that is a foreign entity or someone with nefarious purposes in a domestic environment, gains access to something that they're not supposed to gain access to. And they then give that to media outlets, to individuals in, the online ecosystem, influencers, et cetera, who try to make an impact on discourse that way. What happened here is that all of these narratives about Biden corruption and Hunter Biden's dealings in Ukraine came together at the perfect moment for Rudy Giuliani and Trump and the Republicans. And he was able to go and say, here, we have this laptop. Look at all of this salacious stuff on here. Don't you want to report on it? And we're learning now, actually, that a lot of outlets said, no, unless you let us corroborate these emails first, which is the responsible thing to do, right, we are not going to report on this because we need to kind of track all the information down for ourselves. That is all anybody who was urging caution with this was urging, because A, we didn't know where it came from. We didn't know if the emails were real. And B, it all seemed a little bit too neat and tidy, right? That a laptop would just show up at this laptop repair shop at the critical moment of the campaign. It would fall into the hands of Rudy Giuliani and the New York Post would publish it. You have to admit that's a crazy story. But what we see Russia doing over time, particularly with people like Giuliani, is cultivating them as mouthpieces for the regime, right? And so I actually remember very clearly once in 2019, I was in Ukraine on a reporting visit, and Giuliani, I happened to overlap with him in Ukraine, which just like gave me the heebie-jeebies.
It's gonna sound, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to have to share air with him, but he was tweeting at that time, along with the reporter Chanel Rion from One America News. They were tweeting that Ukraine was a police state and that there were people with machine guns walking around downtown Kiev. Like, I was in the capital at the same time, and it was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was a normal capital city in a European country, right? They were outright lying. So that's the sort of thing that we have going on. And they had gone there for years to meet with, we know now, intelligence operatives to kind of shake down the U.S. ambassador there, Marie Yovanovitch, among others. And this is the pattern of behavior that we see. And folks like Giuliani, it seems like his star is setting at this point now, but he, at one point he could get on any TV network that he wanted to and repeat whatever he wants to. And when you have somebody like Giuliani with that influence, who's going to take lines from Russian disinformation, Russian narratives, and repeat them to American citizens, there's not much to do, right? Like, we all have First Amendment rights, and he can say what he likes on television. And that's what we've seen, right? So that's how the information laundering operation works. That's why it's so difficult to unpick, because there are elements of truth in there, right? Some of those emails got sent. Hunter Biden has had a difficult life and he's made some mistakes. Would I have advised him to be on the board of a Ukrainian energy company when his dad was running for president? Probably not, right? Yeah. But I think we have to separate all these things out and understand how exactly it is we're being manipulated. And it's clear that, in this case, there was a lot of manipulation going on.
Famously, Joe Biden said to Hunter when he was about to get that job, "I hope you know what you're doing."
Yeah.
And, I think we for me, the most interesting story that's come out of that is really how much Joe Biden loves his son.
Absolutely.
And nobody talks about that or reports on that. And, if you, especially as a father, parent, if you've lost your former wife and children to health issues, or to even in this case to accidents, it's just, to me as a dad, I recognize that no one talks about love, no one talks about unconditional love, no one talks about that kind of family support, and that's ultimately the reason why Joe Biden always sticks up for his son. And it would help if the country understood a little more about addiction as well. I think a lot of answers would be discovered there. But that aside, talk to me about how these little bits of truth are actually a tactic that is used in disinformation, where you take aspects of the truth, things that are maybe trivial, and then you dramatize them and you join the dots to make people think that it's true, so that when they do go look it up, they can cross-reference it without any previous experience and think that they've discovered the story.
Yeah, this is one of the things I think that's most widely misunderstood about disinformation, Anthony. And it's that people think, I guess because in 2016 we saw so many crazy fake posts and things coming from teenagers in Macedonia that were just completely made up, everybody thought that disinformation was cut and dry fake news. And actually, the most successful disinformation does have these kernels of truth in it. So one of my favorite stories that I discovered in the course of reporting my first book was about a progressive group, actually, called Americans Take Action, who were very, very active in the early Trump period. They were some of the first to protest after he won the election. They protested at his inauguration. They unfurled a resist banner at the Washington Nationals home opener in 2017. Like, they were doing lots of creative protest. And I happen to be a theater person in my spare time, or I used to be anyway before I had a kid. I remember seeing, when I was still living in Ukraine, I was about to come home and I had kind of reset my Facebook settings so that I was getting more content from the States. And I remember getting this ad that said, oh, theater people, come out. We're going to be protesting on July 4th in front of the White House. We're going to sing songs from the musical Les Miserables. And I thought, that's so funny. You know, leave it to the theater people to get in on something like this. You know, the doctors have done their protests, the women have done their protests, and now the theater people are going to go sing about it. And I thought that was great. And I filed that away. And a couple of years later, 2018, I'm getting off of a plane after a trip to Europe, and I'm getting emails from my media colleagues who are asking me, okay, have you seen this latest criminal complaint from the Secret Service? What's your take on it? And I'm scrolling through it in the cab on the way home from the airport. And they describe a flash mob in front of the White House on July 4th, 2017, during which people sang songs from Les Mis. And I was like, hold on a second. So I went home and I did some digging, and I found that this group, Americans Take Action, had organized this protest. I called up the guy and I was like, hey, have you seen this criminal complaint? Like, what's your take on this? And he said, holy shit, thank you so much for letting us know about this. We had no idea. Nobody had contacted them. Apparently, what had happened was that the Russians identified this group, which again was a real American protest group on the left, said, we want to pry apart the fabric of American society as much as we can. We're going to give some ad money to this group so that we can have a big, silly protest in front of the White House on July 4th. And this guy had no idea that he had been interfacing with a Russian operative. So again, kernel of truth, real protest group, real grievances that then is amplified by our foreign adversaries. And that's, again, what the best disinformation does. A lot of other really good examples where people, you know, get really animated about issues related to gun control, about Texas secessionism, LGBTQ rights, gay rights, all of these things on both sides of the spectrum, including to some instances, they even had dueling protests on different sides of the street, right? It is about animating these pre-existing fissures in our society, and often did lead to real world action. So folks who say, oh, it was just a bunch of ads online, I mean, I think that's garbage. The people were driven to action. And if they were seeing this stuff, I think we can say if they saw that stuff and ended up on the street, it might have changed how they voted. It might have made them stay home from the polls. And I think that's the thing we all need to kind of, regardless of what you think of Trump, regardless of what you think of Biden or what happened in 2016 with Hillary, everybody on any side of the political spectrum should be able to say, I would prefer if Russia, China, and Iran were not, trying to psychographically target me during elections. I want to make my own decision as an American citizen, consuming information sources that, you know, I know and understand where that stuff is coming from. And we've gotten so far removed from that.
Yeah.
The fact that, you know, the party of Reagan is in many cases sticking up for Russia and Vladimir Putin is just bananas to me. And I think we're at an interesting moment right now because in the past couple of months, we have seen some Republicans, including Mike Johnson, who I have no love lost between us. He's said some horrible things about me. They have even said it's crazy that we're a party that's repeating Russian propaganda right now. So I think we might be at a watershed moment. I'm interested to see what happens in the next couple of months.
He's just been caught flying a Christian nationalist flag outside his office.
What is it with these flags? Why are they just don't fly flags, guys, unless it's, the American flag facing the right direction. Yikes.
Part of the problem, it's not a problem, but the timing of the rise of social media has changed things, right? Because this type of information warfare, would it not have been possible in the same way, say 20 years ago, before Twitter and before these sites? Because people switched from watching Walter Cronkite on TV, where everybody got the same news, to suddenly getting an algorithm that they thought that everybody else was getting, but they don't quite realize how tailored the algorithm is for them, and how your Twitter feed looks different to mine, and how your Facebook news looks different to mine. And this is a real problem, isn't it? Because we are almost asking the Russians and the Chinese and whoever else is behind this stuff to target us. Every time we scroll, that the software is measuring what we're looking at, reporting it back to them. TikTok obviously plays a big part in this, because of the China connection. Mm-hmm. But how was it done in Walter Cronkite's day? It was different then, wasn't it?
Oh, you've just hit on so many of my favorite topics, Anthony. So on the kind of Cold War era propaganda, there's a great book called Active Measures by Thomas Rid, where he goes through actually so many of the same tactics that are used today, but how they were used in the analog era, right? It took a lot more time. It was a lot more difficult to target these things. You had to go in through specific protest groups. You had to kind of target narratives over a longer period of time and see if there was any shift. Very famously, the Soviet Union supported this narrative that the United States had created AIDS in a biolab. Sound familiar, anyone? Everything old is new again. Yeah. So that was one of their big information operations. And some were successful, some weren't, but they all played at that same pulling apart the fabric of society, these pre-existing grievances and fissures, right? So that was the same. But as you say, I think people had a trust in media and institutions that they do not anymore. People understood that the content that they were being given on the, Walter Cronkite or any other news program was curated for them. They understood that some stuff got left on the cutting room floor and some stuff was amplified there. And that there were potentially other sources, magazines, other films, advocacy and protest groups where they could find that information. But it all moved a lot more slowly. It was all less reactive. It was all less emotionally charged. And we didn't empower people back then to commit acts of violence and harassment and abuse. That stuff wasn't normalized. And that nexus really worries me.
Right.
If you look at
the rise of reply, the fact that now anybody can join in, whereas before you were the recipient, you were on receive, whereas now anybody can be on transmit as well.
Anybody can be on transmit, and everyone has a megaphone to potentially reach millions of people, and exactly the people who will be most interested. I was going to say most vulnerable. It's not always most vulnerable, right? The social media can be a good thing for protest movements as well, but sometimes most vulnerable to that message as well. And what you said about folks not understanding algorithmic amplification is one of my favorite topics. So all of my research in Central and Eastern Europe has concluded that over time, as nations have figured out how to deal with disinformation, whether foreign or domestic, often the two are connected, right? As we've talked about already, they have settled on a couple of different things. And always at the core is a citizens-based approach to disinformation, educating people. And that is not telling them what is true and what is false online. It is giving them the tools they need to navigate today's fast-moving information environment. So if you look at like Estonia, which actually was the target of one of the first big disinformation campaigns that Russia did in the digital age in around 2007, they have invested very heavily in educating and integrating their Russian-speaking population, which was traditionally quite left behind and disenfranchised. They have recognized, A, that that's a fissure that could be exploited by Russia, and B, that the better educated these citizens would be, they'd be more resilient to disinformation. So they've invested in that. And the same is true for places like Finland, Ukraine, the Czech Republic, Georgia. They all have invested in educating people, and not just about Russian disinformation, but about the ways that information travels today. And I think that's so, so, so important, and something that we have just not invested in, because it's a generational change. And the folks up on Capitol Hill, bless them, they're all, very focused on the next election. And if they can't see results in a 2 to 6 year period, they're not going to necessarily put that as a high priority for them. We also, of course, in the states have some issues around states' rights, right? States deal with education. I think there are ways to get around that. Would probably bore everyone if we talked about it today. But it's such a complex and rich and nuanced issue. And again, most of the time it's getting boiled down to, is something true or false? And should we take it off the internet? And there are so many other ways to approach this problem.
I since moving to the US and having lived in Europe for 40 years and traveled extensively, as most Europeans do, I was kind of surprised to discover quite how antiquated the US is when it comes to systems and infrastructure. There's just nothing here. There's no mass transit or high-speed rail or even like having to put a sticker on your license plate, like a manual physical sticker.
For your registration, yeah.
Right? What is that? It's like all of this should be done through cameras and recognition and stuff, and like the lack of investment. And I do sometimes think that the US thinks that it's way ahead. And obviously Silicon Valley is, but all the other valleys are kind of left behind. Listen, we have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk more about the disinformation into this election, and also a spy who was found dead on Wednesday this week in the UK. Very interesting. So all that to come here on The Weekend Show. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear. And when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Sick of the one-size-fits-all method, especially when it comes to your erectile dysfunction treatment? Well, good news. Now you've got options with Hims. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to doctor-trusted ED treatment options such as chewable hard mints, brand-name treatments like Viagra, or generic alternatives for up to 95% off. The process is simple and 100% online, no uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of simple questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed. If ED is getting you down, it's time to join the hundreds of thousands of trusted Hims subscribers and get treated. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/weekend. That's HIMS.com/weekend for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/weekend. Hard mints are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plan. We're back on the weekend show with Nina Jankowicz. I'm Anthony Davis. We were talking earlier about how the disinformation spreads, or how it spread during the Cold War, and spying was a big thing back then. And, getting information back from places through individuals, it's all, I've just been watching the show Ripley, and there's a whole lot of interesting stuff. And it made me think, it was so different back then. They had no phones. Everyone's writing letters and identity changes, and it's kind of interesting. And there's been a couple of stories that kind of took my attention. One was the Justice Department on Thursday announced the arrests of 3 people in a stolen identity scheme that officials said generates enormous proceeds for the North Korean government. So there was that one. And then the other was the news that came out of the UK that a former Royal Marine was charged with spying for China. And he was found dead on Wednesday in unexplained circumstances in a park. And when you hear about this stuff, it's a bit like the poisonings that were going on. Alexander Litvinenko, for example, and obviously even with the former Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, it makes you realize that there is this whole kind of secret world where countries are spying and removing people and all this stuff. And I don't think the average American really considers that this whole it's an industry in itself. Just talk to that if you can, and maybe explain about how it connects to the elections here in the US.
Yeah. So, we've seen a couple of really interesting cases of either opposition leaders, like you mentioned, Navalny. There's also Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was poisoned several times, and as well as, of course, the Salisbury poisoning in the UK, where a former double agent and his daughter ended up getting poisoned by a terrible nerve agent.
On a park bench. It was very innocent, right?
I think it was their door handle, right? And then two unrelated people found the perfume bottle that the spies had used to apply the nerve agent, and I think one of them died. That was in the park in Salisbury. Right. Absolutely ridiculous. There was a shooting of I think an opposition leader in Germany a couple of years ago. A Russian opposition leader, one of Navalny's associates, attacked in Lithuania. Right. So this is an ongoing game. That being said, as you said, nations have conducted these sorts of operations for a long time. All of that is happening in the shadows. There are a lot of allegations being bandied about lately of people who are doing things that the other side doesn't like, quote unquote, being deep state operatives or being clandestine operatives, including this has been an accusation that has been levied against me when I've never had any association with the intelligence community here in the States. So I think while we can look at it and we can respect it and we can wonder about it and enjoy, nice things like The Americans or Ripley or other programs that are, dramatizing it, I think we also need to recognize that not everyone that we dislike is a clandestine operative. And frankly, that sort of thing has been really frustrating to me, and it's muddying a lot of the discourse around elections as we head toward the U.S. election. So just a few days ago, there was a wide expose by the same guys that brought you the Twitter files, so you should not trust it as far as you can throw it, claiming that I and many other people are working together with the CIA to censor Americans, right? Just more of the same. And there's no evidence for any of this, but they'll continue making that claim, and it will continue endangering people and continue to, frankly, I think to shutter a lot of the operations that are going on to protect the election, because it's becoming very risky to do this work. And when you empower people and give them a huge platform who are then saying, this person is a spy, this person is committing treason against the United States, all of these people are among you, then, you have to be responsible for your actions. And some people go on to threaten, some people go on to stalk. That stuff is really scary. That being said, the fact that Russia, China, North Korea, others are interfering in our elections through clandestine means is a fact. The intelligence community, our Office of the Director of National Intelligence, released a report at the end of last year that looked back at the 2022 elections and detailed in pretty extensive detail, actually, the ways that Russia, China, and Iran had sought to interfere or decided not to interfere in the midterms. The big headline there was that they were doing it very deliberately and in acute detail. So it wasn't just a mass campaign. It was like, oh, this particular member of Congress is unhelpful to us, so we're going to try to shift things there. Or in Russia's case, a lot to do with Ukraine aid, right? And changing the tide of opinions around Ukraine. I think another interesting fact there was that it's not just those three nations, right? There are others that were named and unfortunately redacted, but I think we can probably assume likely North Korea and Cuba, among others, who are interfering as well, because this playbook has been blown open. These tools are available for anybody, given the interconnectedness of the internet. And so when I think about what's to come, a couple of things come up for me. One, we are absolutely kind of vulnerable right now, given the polarization.
We're open to it. Yeah,
exactly. The polarization, but also, frankly, the reticence of everyone to accept that this is happening, despite the facts that are there on the table. And then the reticence of the administration to act. In some cases, they have been backed into a corner. In some cases, I personally would have been much, much more aggressive, particularly on the foreign interference angle, to push back. And I worry about what's to come because now we're in this age where AI has been introduced, right? And people are like, can I trust anything I read or see anymore? Which leads them to disengage. And we can't really have a good, strong democracy if people are disengaging, if they can't trust anything they read, and if they're, living in different realities, which is essentially where we are. So from spies to AI to elections, I think I got it all done there.
I appreciate that. I mean, I also think that lack of understanding and a little bit of racism plays a part in this as well, in terms of the understanding from Americans. And this was a perfect example of this was when the boss of TikTok was being grilled by congressional Republicans recently. And he was asked, are you or have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah,
and he's like,
from Singapore.
No, I'm from Singapore. And they were like, well, yeah, but, are you a member of the China? And he was like, no, I'm Singaporean. I was born in Singapore and I live in Singapore. And do you think that was like lack of knowledge of these Republicans about geography and how the world works? Or was it a little bit of racism, possibly a lot of racism? Or was it actual misinformation specifically from these congressional Republicans because they knew it would get replayed deliberate on Fox?
Exactly. I think they know it's deliberate. So the way these hearings work, right, it's a little bit of theater. And these folks come in with their question lines written for them. If they stray from them, their staff will get mad and there's no real, consequence. But generally, they stick to the questions that are on the page because that's how they've prepped and the material that goes into it. So if they were asking, have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party? There's a reason that they're doing it, and it's so that it can go viral, right? And I'm sure that their target audience, their constituents, wherever, they're from, are going to say, oh, that guy's lying, even though he's under oath, right, at risk of perjury. They're going to say that person is lying and that, he probably secretly is a member of the Chinese Communist Party. It's ridiculous, but that's how it is. And of course, it does play on Americans' lack of knowledge of the world. Like, what is Singapore? I'm sure many Americans can't tell you if it's a democracy or not, right? And that's problematic as well. So I think that's part of it. But, TikTok more broadly, I understand the desire to want to regulate it. I'm in the camp of, if we want to regulate TikTok and we want privacy for American citizens related to TikTok, we also need to think about our privacy for other social media companies and the data that they are gathering on us, because we've had instances in which, for instance, on Twitter or at Twitter, there was a Saudi operative who used Twitter, his employment at Twitter, to gain access to opposition figures' personal data and then gave it to the Saudi government, right? Like, we know that that's happened. We know that these companies aren't impervious. So perhaps we should start, if we really truly care about American citizens' privacy and the way that they're being targeted, to recognize that, yeah, it's concerning that China can gain all that data, including location data on American citizens. Don't get me wrong. But but we need to make sure that that data is being protected from all the other companies as well, because there have been notable hacks. There have been instances of security lapses at these companies, and I think Americans deserve that, just like our compatriots in Europe have.
Well, Cambridge Analytica is a perfect example of this, right?
Yeah.
A data mining company that was selling data, very specific data about individuals into politics, so that elections, it happened with Brexit in the UK, incidentally, with the same company. That was like a test bed, really, for 2016, wasn't it? But just to explain to people, because I'm of the opinion that Donald Trump is not anywhere close to as popular as he would like to think he is and how he tells us he is. And yet, with janky polls now, people think that, November 2024 is neck and neck. I don't believe that is the case at all. I think that all of the energy surrounding Trump is courtesy of misinformation and disinformation, whether it be from Russia or elsewhere, or even from the far right, which is they have means, they have wealthy donors, they have the kind of investment that enables them to do this. What they haven't kind of worked out how to do is rig the vote specifically, at the polling place. And so, there's a good chance that Trump could lose by a significant margin. And I don't think people are kind of prepared for that, because they've been built up to think that he is as popular as the Democrats are, when the guy has never done anything right since the day he showed up.
Yeah, oh gosh, there's a lot there too. I mean, you mentioned rigging the vote. So I've been an election observer in countries where democracy is not guaranteed. I have observed elections in Ukraine, in Russia, and in the Republic of Georgia. Obviously, in Ukraine and Georgia, things are a lot more democratic than they are in Russia. I saw Putin's re-election campaign happen in 2018 in Russia, and let me tell you, that was really something to see. I was basically in what was the Russian Detroit, where a lot of kind of industry is concentrated, and folks from the car factory came up. I have a little bit of a Slavic face, right? I've got, Polish and Ukrainian blood. So I look Russian when I'm dressed up there, and I was speaking Russian. They came up to me, I guess, thinking that I was working at the polling place, and asked where they could get the proof that they had voted, because they needed to show it to their supervisor. So it's not quite election rigging, except that you might lose your job if you don't go vote, and they assume that you voted for Putin, right? That's what's going on there. Meanwhile, in places like Russia, or in places like Georgia and Ukraine, while they have had democratic elections for the past several cycles, and they grow stronger by the day, that distrust of the system and the idea that your vote might not be counted really lingers for years and years and generations. People want to see their ballot, their physical ballot, go into the box, right? They want to make sure that it's being counted.
Yeah, you watch it go in, don't you? You don't leave the room until you've
and they've actually got these giant clear boxes there that they physically put their ballots in. And most of these places, they don't have kind of the vote scanners that we have. And I think that's a good thing, frankly. But so it's just interesting to see. And that's why these kind of allegations of voter fraud coming from the Republicans, which lost in court, we know to be false. Back then, I knew that they were going to have a lasting kind of pallor of distrust on our system. And so I'm really worried about that. And even if Trump loses by a landslide, if Biden wins by just a little bit, or vice versa, right? I think there's going to be allegations of fraud on everywhere. And I'm worried
he's already saying it. He's already saying if I lose, it'll be fraud.
And we have so many candidates, Republican candidates for office, saying that they're not going to accept the results of the election when they are announced, which I think is truly troubling. We've also seen, I have to, credit where, or not credit, shade where shade is due. There have been a couple of early primary candidates on the Democratic side who have called things rigged and fraud. And I think we need to make sure that we are being very clear when we use that language. And I would urge all folks on any side against using it unless you have clear evidence. So I really worry, and I think we're kind of in a moment democratically where things could go very poorly. And I think that's why, you know, when we think about the work we're doing at the American Sunlight Project and countering disinformation, exposing, you know, deceptive information practices, particularly in the lead up to the election, but not only, I actually think we're focusing a lot of our energy on thinking about the period between November and January.
Yes.
And I think folks should be prepared for a hard slog the same way it was in 2020 as we head to 2024.
But Trump's not the incumbent this time, so it's not going to be the same where
Yes.
he has to be dragged out of the White House. He
Yeah.
might be forcing
that's
his
true.
way in. But part of the problem is that in the parallel universe, which is how I describe it, because if you're in the MAGA bubble, you think that Trump is the president. He's basically running a shadow presidency, and they think he still wears the badge. People still call him Mr. President. Apparently, he has a fake like Resolute desk in his office in Mar-a-Lago. The guy is deranged, but unfortunately, the people that have been brainwashed that support him, they have lost so much faith in the system because of his rhetoric.
Yeah.
That they are prepared to support an entire shadow government effectively. And that's my fear going forward, is that America will end up splitting. I mean, so much for the United States. I mean, it'll need to be renamed.
Yeah, I really worry about that as well. And I mean, our government can't function if it's only, you know, my people who are in government. This whole idea that Trump will bring back Schedule F so that he can dismiss civil servants that aren't quote unquote loyal enough to him is a shocking, shocking proposition, because there are hundreds of thousands of civil servants who are apolitical, who have done their jobs sometimes for decades, who, you know, they keep their politics to themselves. They go in and they do the work. They take an oath to defend the Constitution and do what's best for the country. And they really believe in that. And they've worked I know a lot of people in Washington who have worked in kind of crazy circumstances, going from Clinton to Bush and Obama to Trump, and they have done their darndest to keep doing their jobs. And to suggest that these folks are in some way disloyal to America, that is shocking to me. And I don't think most people understand, you know, the quiet work that these folks do to make sure that our government keeps running, to make sure that we're safe, to get people, you know, their tax reimbursements and other things, to make sure we get the mail on time. And that trickles down. It's not just at the federal level, right? I mean, the folks at the state and local levels won't be, you know, hit by Trump's directives, but that distrust trickles down. You know, people don't realize that we rely on our local government to get us our trash taken away, you know, to deal with water and sewer and schools and all of these things. And I think a little bit of civics could do us a lot of good right now.
And part of the problem also is that the judiciary has been infiltrated by MAGA Republicans and Trumpism. We're seeing
very
it now
deliberately.
Right. Trump put in 300 odd judges. I think it was 285 or 286 or something. Mm-hmm. Loyalists in many cases. We're seeing it with Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida. We're now hearing it from Justice Samuel Alito in the Supreme Court. And that's before you count the three kind of MAGA Republican and Christian nationalist justices that Trump managed to squeeze in before the end of his presidency. Yeah. They ruled on Tuesday, I think, that you know, another state doesn't have to redraw its boundaries to you know, enable people of color to be considered. And that's another big problem, isn't it? Just the Electoral College as a system being infiltrated. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot for a country that claims to be free and, you know, upholding democracy. Really is struggling to, some might argue democracy is hanging by a thread.
I do worry about the state of American democracy. And I worked for a couple of years in democracy support initiatives in places in Eastern Europe. And I remarked back in 2020, and I am remarking again now, that if we had, and we will have, international election observers coming to look at our election, I'm sure they're already writing reports, they will note that things are not so good, right? If you have a major candidate in a party who says that he's not going to accept the results of the election, and he has major personalities in that party repeating that, that is a huge problem. I wrote in 2020 for The Atlantic talking about election observation and what an important role that plays in democracies around the world. And the fact that Trump was empowering armed election observers, the Proud Boys and others,
Yes.
Stand back and stand by. We all remember that chilling comment. Again, that is, as an election observer, you write that in your report and you say, well, the major candidate, one of the major candidates is telling armed people to go and intimidate folks at the polls, whether or not they intend to cause violence or not. The idea that somebody with a gun is standing there watching you cast your vote, that's really scary. And again, in any other democracy around the world, alarm bells would be going off. So I bristle at the idea that some people don't believe things are as bad as they are. And I had a conversation last weekend that really shocked me. It was mostly older men around a lunch table with me, and we were talking about prospects for 2024. And one repeated, I don't think it's going to be as bad as everyone says. I don't think our democracy is hanging by a thread. I was one of two women at the table, and I was like, do you not see what's happening with reproductive rights and bodily autonomy? And his answer was very telling. He said, well, that's already happened. Excuse me? Like, thanks a lot. You've just traded away my rights, and you don't think that this is a problem?
A lot of Republicans thought that once Roe was reversed, that eventually women would just, and feminists like myself, would just go quietly. No concept, no empathy for the fact that, women get a reminder of this every month. And this is something that I feel is probably going to be one of the major reasons why Joe Biden is successful.
I totally agree. I think women are very, very pissed off. I was at an event at the 19th News a couple of weeks ago talking about equal participation in democracy for women and people of LGBTQ backgrounds. And they asked what gives you hope. And I said moms. So I'm the mom to a 2-year-old. We're about to do potty training. There's nothing that makes me feel more solidarity than connecting with other mothers and some dads, I will say, about, what it's like being a mom to a toddler, and the fact that anyone would be forced to do this. I love my son more than life itself, right? I love this child. But I remember being in labor, and this was just after we heard the leak about Roe being repealed. And I turned to my husband and said, can you imagine anybody doing this against their will? I just think it is something that is so sacred and so beautiful, and it should be your choice if you want to make a baby and raise a child in this world. And the fact that we've taken that away, particularly with the IVF discussion, which is so big among some conservative communities. I mean, it's big for everybody, right? But I think this is going to be huge, and hell hath no fury, right? I mean, there's a reason that's a truism in our society.
Yeah. It's not, November and beyond is not going to be quiet. That's for certain. I think people forget about, during Trump's presidency, the women's marches and the BLM marches and the kind of barbed wire that went up around the White House, and it became a fortress. I mean, National Guard on the street. I mean, it got pretty crazy, and I fear we may see that again. We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and have some final thoughts about this election and about what people can do to keep themselves safe as they go vote. That's next here on The Weekend Show. What if there was a simple way to reduce your carbon footprint by up to 127%? When food waste goes to landfill, it breaks down into methane, which is a greenhouse gas 80 times stronger than carbon dioxide. Instead, do what I've done. Turn your food waste into nutrient-rich plant food with Lomi. Lomi transforms your home into a climate solution, lowering your carbon footprint and helping keep the planet a little greener and your home a little cleaner. And now, Lomi's new app lets me track my environmental impact, earn points for every cycle, and redeem for freebies from Lomi and other great brands. Don't miss out on your chance to get the best gift for yourself and Mother Earth. Order your Lomi today. Head to lomi.com/uncovered and use the promo code UNCOVERED to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you head to lomi.com/uncovered and use promo code UNCOVERED at checkout. Thank you, Lomi, for sponsoring this episode. We're back on The Weekend Show. Nina, Microsoft last month said that Russian online campaigns to influence the upcoming election had already kicked into gear. They'd measured it been like 45 days into before April, but at a slower pace than in past elections. They said Russian-linked accounts were disseminating divisive content aimed at U.S. audiences, including criticizing American support of Ukraine and its war in Russia. This is something, obviously, Microsoft, I guess, will do what they can to tighten things up. But what can individuals do to, keep themselves safe? Because the misinformation, disinformation is not just coming from abroad, but we're hearing it from Trump and from Republicans, as we've been discussing. So it's kind of everywhere. So is there anything as an expert in this that you would say to people who want to maybe segregate themselves from influence? Is there anything we can do?
I don't think anyone can fully segregate themselves from influence, right? We're being advertised to at all times. Your mother, your spouse might be influencing you, right? That's a fact, and that's okay. And I don't think we want a society where we're not persuadable or influenced. That makes things interesting. However,
and even open to discussion and discourse,
right? Debate, and that openness, I think, is important, as is consuming information deliberately. So I do an exercise with my graduate students who come in, and they're all very smart. Some of them are mid-career, right? They work fancy jobs in Washington, and they come to my class on disinformation and influence. And I say, you're going to track your information consumption for 24 hours. And they all roll their eyes, and they're like, well, I know what I consume. I know where I get but no, I make them do it. I make them write it down. And we talk about it afterward. And what we find time and time again, I've done this exercise 3 times now, is that we're all much more passive about our information consumption than we think. I mean, everybody sits in their bed at night right before they go to bed, scrolling, looking at cat pics, whatever it is that you do online. And that's not deliberate, right? And sometimes we get information from a news source there, or a friend will text us a link, or we're in a WhatsApp group that has, a lot of different sources being shared, or a Telegram channel or a Facebook group, right? And you're not vetting all of that stuff, and that's okay. But what I encourage people to do is be deliberate and take a beat. When you feel yourself getting emotional in one way or the other, that could be, elation at a funny baby doing silly things on Instagram, or it could be rage at a Facebook post about some, really divisive issue in our country. You are most likely being manipulated. You might be being sold baby products or rage farmed for clicks. And I do have to say, this is not a solely conservative phenomenon, right? Like, this is how advertising works. And so I really encourage everybody, this was coined during COVID, the early days of COVID. If you feel yourself getting emotional, put your phone down and do a little informational distancing, right? Walk away from your computer, go touch grass, think about, what you just read. If it's still bothering you in a couple of minutes, then do some lateral reading. You can see, what's this source? Oh, this Anthony Davis guy, is he trustworthy? Let me do a little background on him. What is the source? Where does their funding come from? What are they trying to do? What do I think their goal is? And if you find still that there is trustworthy information there, or that other people are reporting it in a breaking news event, that's a good indication that things are okay. But again, just be deliberate about that information consumption and recognize the signs of manipulation in yourself. And the primary one there is high emotion. So take breaks, put your phones down, see people face to face. I think that's really important. And recognize also that this is not a hopeless situation. One of the things that I say in my first book is that we're all on the front lines of the information war, where it's up to us what things get shared, right? Yes, there's a lot of algorithmic curation going on, and some things might not make their way to us. But when you see something good, share it. If you see something you're not sure about, if you are really not even 100% sure, do not share it, because then you're contributing to this kind of amplification of information that is perhaps undermining our democracy. So when in doubt, click out. I just made that up now. That's not very good. But don't share it if you're not sure.
Fear is another thing that American news networks especially like to
Absolutely.
trade on.
Yeah.
Scaring people, trying to make people think that the Grim Reaper is coming, a countdown to doomsday and everything else. And I mean, I don't watch any news. I just don't. I like to write it and I like to report on it, but I don't watch other people's news production apart from occasional clips. And I dip into Fox every now and then because I want to see how the propaganda is being presented. And it's terrifying. It's completely untrue. And yet for some people, they have it on all the time.
Yeah.
And it gets the blood pressure up, doesn't it? And it makes, they're trying to scare people into voting in a way. And what Trump has done is claiming that America is broken and that immigration is broken and that the economy is broken when neither are true. Yeah. And yet he's the only one that can fix it. I mean, this is a very standard playbook for despots and autocrats, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've seen that in places like Hungary, recently in Poland, although Poland has kind of pulled itself back from the abyss now. And it's something that Putin does in Russia as well. I mean, he's got a call-in press conference every year where Russian citizens can say, oh, I've got a huge pothole in my road. And that's the way that they get things fixed. It's very effective. And I think Trump does similar things with kind of the issues that people care about. Of course, he's got this huge megaphone with the conservative media ecosystem, and that benefits them as well. The more you're kind of scaring people, the more they're going to stay on the edge of their seat, tuned in to your network, which, of course, we've seen come out in things like the Dominion suit against Fox. So try to resist that. Fear is an emotion as well. The whole spectrum is stuff that people tap into to manipulate us. And we just need to recognize that in ourselves and pull back a little bit before we're engaging in the support of people who are lying to us for power and for profit.
Dominion really are the only ones standing up for democracy with any great success, aren't they? I mean, they sued Fox.
I think there are others. So Dominion,
but I mean, in terms of actually putting Fox in its place, whereby they had to. Or, they've stopped claiming that the election was rigged, right?
Exactly. Well, there's another pending lawsuit with another voting company, Smartmatic.
That's right.
Yes. There have been a couple of other successes in defamation law for individuals as well. Of course, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss won their case against Rudy Giuliani. There was a victory for a climate scientist named Michael Mann, who was awarded awarded damages in a trial here in DC. And I'm trying my best, Anthony. I'm waiting for the motion to dismiss to be decided on in my case against Fox. But hopefully that will be in the coming months, and we will see what happens from there. But, I think it's really important that we don't incentivize this lying, and that when people tell deliberate lies for profit that then ruin other people's lives, that they be held accountable. And I hope that my case, no matter what happens, can kind of pave the way for others to try that tactic, because certainly the other side is using it, and I think we should use it for good.
Okay. We have to finish, but I'm very grateful for your expertise and for your advice, and wish you luck with everything that you do. Nina Jankowicz.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. See more of me on the 5 Minute News channel, and I'll be back with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.